What is a social problem film? According to multiple sources, a social problem film is simply a narrative film that integrates a larger social conflict into the individual conflict between characters. Hollywood did produce and market a number of topical films in the 1930s, and by the 1940s, the term social problem was conventional in its usage among the public as well as the film industry. Progressive era. The Progressive era lasted from roughly the 1930s all the way through parts of the 1960s. Also, generally, these dealt with prohibition, labor relations, and union work. Not all films during this era were happy films, nor were all of them sad. This era had 6 major categories of social problem films. Labor capital films. Ideological perspectives on class relations. Commonly, these were conservative, liberal, radical, populists, and anti-authoritarian. Conservative films. These dealt with unions, radicals, and mass movements. The mass movements were portrayed in the worst possible light and rarely explained why workers went on strike or joined class-related organizations. Liberal films. These condemned the exploitation of workers by irresponsible capitalists. These also advocated reform, but not radicalism. This was the best way to solve the nation's industrial ills. These sort of films were more sympathetic towards unions. Radical films. These countered liberal and conservative films with positive images of socialists, but also had equally harsh critiques of capitalists and capitalism. Lastly, socialism was portrayed as a peaceful alternative way to violence. Populist movies. These preached a deepened hatred for greedy monopolists that showed how they consistently undermined the well-being of the nation. Anti-authoritarian films. These did not directly challenge capitalists or capitalism, but on the other hand, they did mock the authoritative figures who gave people a hard time. These would be employers, foremen, landlords, police, and judges. Social problem films post-World War II. Many Americans were afraid that the nation was going to fall back into another economic depression. Filmmakers responded to this by making an Oscar-winning film called The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. This film focused on the economic and social reconfiguration of vets. Other films that were made were Crossfire, 1949, and Gentleman's Agreement, 1949. Both of these looked at anti-Semitism. Also, the films Pinky, 1949, and Intruder in the Dust, 1949, were created to help with the issue of racism. HUAC. Around 1947, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC for short, invaded Hollywood and accused many filmmakers of manufacturing films that were against American values. Two that were cited specifically were Mission to Moscow, 1943, and Song of Russia, 1944. By the conclusion of the committee, these were found to promote Soviet ideology. Hollywood's response. Hollywood responded to HUAC by creating a blacklist of suspects. These included performers, writers, and directors. Other factors that contributed to Hollywood's decision to do this was that the American Legion was threatening a boycott. On top of the blacklist, Hollywood tried to show its dedication to the anti-communist crusade and turned out an interesting series of films. A few of these included Big Jim McLean, 1952, My Son John, 1952, The Red Menace, 1949, and I Was a Communist for the FBI, 1951. Though Hollywood tried their best to help, the anti-communist genre did not prove to be very profitable. After this, Hollywood began to turn out films in the 1950s that reinforced traditional values and support systems that centered upon family, religion, work, and anti-communism. Social problem films through the 1980s. Near the 1960s, the anti-communist genre was basically non-existent. Hollywood had turned to another genre of film. These were youthful, rebellious films such as Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, The Graduate, 1967, and Easy Rider, 1969. During the 1960s, the blacklist was also broken by Martin Ritt's The Front. As the years went on, the films became about the Vietnam War, and things such as Robert Altman's MASH (1970) attacked the war and the military. Other films that questioned the Vietnam War were Apocalypse Now (1979), Platoon (1986), and Full Metal Jacket (1987). These films, though, were made years after the war was over.